Okay, I think we are ready to begin.
Okay.
So for this, we need a volunteer to read for us this Mishnah. Before someone reads for us the Mishnah, let's just give a little background of this chapter. This week, the chapter of the week is chapter 6. Now, if you look in the old Mishnah, you'll see that the whole book, the whole tractate of the book of ethics or ethics of our fathers, Pirkei Avot, is only 5 chapters. So how did it get a 6th chapter? The way it got the 6th chapter was that Jews had this custom of learning every week 1 chapter between Passover and Shavuot to prepare themselves ethically to be ready for the giving of the Torah. And there's really 6 weeks between, even 7, but at least 6 Shabbos, 6 Shabbosim, or Sabbath is, how do you say Sabbaths? Sabbaths between Passover and Shavuot. So they decided, we'll collect teachings from the same sages who wrote the first 5 books, and their colleagues will collect teachings that have to do with the special qualities of the Torah, as well as the qualities that a person needs in order to acquire Torah knowledge, humility and joy and other qualities that are important. And we'll compile all those different teachings into a 6th chapter. And that will be read just before Shavuot when we receive the Torah. So it'll be a good preparation. So the Mishnah that we're going to deal with today touches upon the idea that Torah is very cherished by God, and it goes through other things that are acquisitions of God. So this is one of the last Mishnahs. So that's the text we're going to be studying today. So we're going to read this Mishnah. It's going to seem a little bit a very wordy Mishnah. That means you could lose hold on, what's going on here? What is it trying to say? And so we'll take a volunteer who will read it for us, the English, and then we'll do a deeper dive into what it's actually saying. So who's our volunteer for today?
I'll do it if you want.
Okay, so you begin. There's other readings later, so Amy, you begin.
Okay. There are 5 acquisitions that God acquired in his world. These are: the Torah is 1 acquisition, heaven and earth are 1 acquisition, Abraham is 1 acquisition, the people of Israel are 1 acquisition, and the Holy Temple is 1 acquisition. The Torah as it is written, God acquired me as the beginning of his way before his works of yore. Heaven and earth as it is written, so says God, the heaven is my throne and the earth is my footstool. What house then can you build for me, and where is my place of rest? And it says, how many are your works, O God? You have made them all with wisdom. The earth is filled with your acquisitions. Abraham, as it is written, he blessed him and said, blessed be Abram to God, most high acquirer of heaven and earth. The people of Israel, as it is written, until your nation, O God, will pass, until this nation you have acquired will pass. And it says, to the holy ones who are upon earth, the noble ones, in whom is all my delight. The holy temple, as it is written, the base for your dwelling that you, God, have achieved, the sanctuary, O Lord, that your hands have established. And it says, he brought them to his holy dominion, this mount his right hand has acquired.
Okay, so this is characteristic of a Mishnah, where the Mishnah is stating something that was in the oral tradition that Jews knew from Mount Sinai, from Moses. Moses taught orally to the Jewish people this idea that there are 5 acquisitions that God acquired in his world. And then the authors of the Mishnah said, let's try to find support for this oral teaching in the written text. So then they scan the written text and they try to find support for something that, in other words, it's not necessarily as if the text prove the case. It's more supporting evidence to a fact that the sages of Israel always had in their tradition all the ways back to Mount Sinai. What's interesting about this Mishnah is the idea that God can acquire something. What does it mean that God acquires something? If everything is created by God, so everything belongs to God. How do you acquire, how do you purchase something if you own everything? And this it's not as if the Mishnah is not aware of this fact that God owns everything. Look how it starts off the Mishnah. 5 acquisitions that God acquired in his world. The world is his, it belongs to him. And somehow he's able to acquire things within the world. So what does that mean? So at a most basic level, the idea of acquisition is trying to say these things are very precious to God. When you have something that you're born with, a certain skill or resource that you always had, you don't appreciate it as much as something that you acquired later on in life. So that's what this Mishnah is coming to say. God owns everything, of course. But these 5 things, he has a deeper appreciation to, similar to how we appreciate things that we at one point didn't have. And then we came to have them more than things that we've always had and we tend to take for granted. So the following 2 stories come to mind. One has been making the rounds on the internet and WhatsApp and Instagram, Facebook, and like all such stories. I don't know if it's true, but the point that's made from this story is quite interesting. So it goes like this. An elderly man was hospitalized with coronavirus. At a certain point, his condition deteriorated to the point that he needed to be hooked up to a ventilator. But thankfully, his condition improved, and soon after, he was breathing on his own until he had sufficiently recovered to be released from the hospital. When he was being discharged, so he was presented with a bill from the hospital, and he started to cry. So the doctor told him, no need, don't worry. I know the bill could seem very high, but the hospital works with you and they'll try to make an arrangement for payment and don't get overwhelmed. So he said, I'm not crying over the fact, you don't understand what I'm crying about. I'm crying because I see a line item that says $1,000 for the use of a ventilator for 1 day. For 92 years, I have been breathing every day with the lung that God gave me and the oxygen that God provides, all for free. Yet I never appreciated how valuable that was until I was charged $1,000 for 1 day of breathing.
Wow.
So, we have things, we have just the idea of ear. We take for, whoever spends a second to think about ear? And yet, when you go to space, you learn how critical it is to be without ear, and how, God forbid, a lapse in ear, is critical, but we take it for granted, and yet it's readily available. So, but things that are not always available to us, and then we come across them, we tend to appreciate it more. As is obvious when you see people born into wealth versus people that achieved wealth over a long time, or people born with health, and people that achieve some control of health, people that were gifted eyesight later on in life, or gifted the ability to hear later on in life. So that's the story number 1. Story number 2 is also a powerful story. We know that when it comes to just after Yom Kippur is a festival of Sukkot, when we celebrate by eating a sukkah, And we gather the 4 different kinds of vegetative, 4 species. We bring them together, we shake it, we do a mitzvah. And the jewel of the 4 species is the etrog. The etrog is, an interesting fruit, and we take for granted, you just go to Main Street in Queens, so you go to Brooklyn and you could buy an etrog. But etrogs don't grow, you can't buy them in the supermarket, and they don't grow in most regions. They don't grow in, very limited where they could grow successfully. 2 years ago, you'll recall that there was a frost in Italy, and there was a huge shortage of etrogim because it wiped out the whole supply, because they just got frozen, so there was a low batch. And we have the ability of, the global import-export system. But in those days, if you lived in Russia, where are you going to get an etrog from? I had a teacher who he told me that the first time he saw an orange was when he was like 17 years old. He left Russia and he went to Paris, and that was the first time he saw an orange. So we what's so big deal about an orange? So compound that with an etrog, really hard to come by. So while the preferred way to do the mitzvah is for everyone to have their own etrog, in those days you were lucky if the city had 3 or 4 and everyone would share them. One year in the city of Bardichev, they were having no luck of finding etrogim, and they set messengers to neighboring villages to try to find if there's an extra etrog for the whole city of Bardichev. They're going to use 1 etrog for the whole city. Finally, they found a man who was he used to go to he used to travel away from home to a major city, buy a ton of supplies, and then bring it back to his shtetl, his village, and then distribute it to other villages. And that was his business, wholesaler, but kind of business. So he was traveling, and he was in a major city where they had a supply of etrogim, and he brought one to bring to his family. He didn't live in Bardichev. So they asked him, please, would you come to Bardichev to give your etrog to Bardichev? He's like, I've been away from my family for months. I'm not willing to spend, I already missed Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur with my family. I'm not ready to give up Sukkot with my family. So the leader of Bardichev, his name was Rebbe Levi Yitzchak of Bardichev, a famed Hasidic Rebbe, and this story happened more than 200 years ago. And the Hasidic Rebbe Levi Yitzchak Bardichev called him in and tried to beg him and plead with him. I know you haven't been with your family, but think about all the Jews that over here that could use an etrog. He says, I'm going to give you an etrog, and then I'm going to be without an etrog. He's like, no, you stay here. It wasn't going well, the negotiations. So finally, the Rebbe told him, I promise you, I'll split my share in the world to come with you. Whatever share and merit I have in the world to come, I'm splitting it with you. So he said, oh, that's a deal I can't refuse. So he accepted the deal, and he stayed. He sent a telegram to his family, I won't be able to make it, hope you understand. I'll be there right after Sukkot. And he stayed in Bardichev for the festival of Sukkot. So it comes the first night of Sukkot, and he's waiting as the celebrity of the town. He's the one with the etrog. He's waiting for an invitation. Someone's going to invite him to, that he should join in their meal for Sukkot. But comes one Sukkah, nobody invites him. Everyone just completely ignores him. He's in synagogue. Everyone knows he's a visitor, but everyone completely ignores. No one invites him. So finally he decides, what am I? I'm not going to eat in a sukkah on Sukkot. So he decides to invite himself. He goes onto the first door, says, oh, we're sorry, we're really full, we can't do it right now. Every sukkah he goes to, a different excuse why they can't accept him in their sukkah. finally, with one of the potential hosts, he's begging and pleading, please, I have my own food. I'm just going to come and I'm going to eat for a minute in your sukkah. What's the big deal? We know if you steal your way into a sukkah and you don't have permission to eat there, you don't fulfill the mitzvah. So you really have to have the host's permission. And they're like, no. Finally, one of the potential hosts breaks loose and says, we're on strict orders not to invite you into our sukkah. Strict orders? Where does this come from? This is from the priest of the city. No, this comes from the Rebbe himself. The Rebbe himself forbids us to invite you into our sukkah. So he comes to Yitzchak Bardichev. He's like, how could you do this to me? I was going to be in my house with my family, and now you tell everyone not to invite me? He says, I really needed the etrog, and I couldn't convince you to say, so I had to give you a half a share in the world to come. But I feel like I am not ready to part with my half of my share in the world to come. If you release me from my obligation to share my half, I'll release the ban on inviting you into their sukkah. And he was so angry at this trick that he was played for a fool. But when he thought about it, he's like, I can't give up on. I've always eaten in a sukkah. This is a mitzvah that's been very important to me. And so he decided to release the Rebbe from his obligation, and he ate in the sukkah. And then after he ate in the sukkah, the Rebbe said, I want to tell you something. He says, you don't realize what you just earned yourself. By you giving up half of the world to come to eat in a sukkah, you actually earned something greater than that. Because imagine if you were sitting in my portion of the world to come when you didn't really deserve it. You'd feel so ashamed and so unbelonging. You'd be getting special revelations, and you feel I don't have any connection to these things because I don't deserve it. But now that you gave up all of that to do this mitzvah, now you in fact acquired it, and therefore now you really belong there. So this whole scheme was really to make sure that you own your place, not just that you are granted as a gift. So it's the same idea when we acquire something that we worked hard for, and we receive it, it's actually a lot more important and meaningful to us and has a greater impact on us. So that's one idea of what this Mishnah is coming to say. There's also a deeper meaning of the Mishnah. And the deeper meaning of the Mishnah is that, of course, we say that the whole world is God. But if you own your house, everyone looks in the telephone book and sees this person owns this house. Everyone knows who owns this house. It's public knowledge. Yet you look in the world today, does everyone acknowledge that God owns the world and God made the world? No. So when we're saying these 5 things are things that bring to the world's attention that God is its creator, and that God acquired this world, that God has ownership of his world that he created. There once was actually, before I share the story, let's read a text number 2. Let's read this text here. Let me give some background to this text. Okay, actually, let's read it. Let's see.
Who, me or?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Now he is the God of the heaven and the God of the earth, because I have made him familiar in the mouth of the people. But when he took me from my father's house, he was the God of the heavens.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, continue.
But now the God of the heaven, but not the God of the heaven. No, not the God of the earth, because mankind did not acknowledge him, and his name was not familiar on the earth.
Okay, this is a text from Rashi. Yeah, Rashi is a commentary, the first comment, the most important commentary on the Bible, on the Torah. So Rashi says, hold on, there's a discrepancy. And Abraham is having a conversation with his servant Eliezer, and there's a discrepancy. In one place, he tells Eliezer, God of the heaven and God of the earth. But then when he's describing his background to Eliezer, he says, you know where I come from? I come from a land that was completely pagan until God of the heaven took me out. So Rashi is noticing, hold on. Earlier, he called God, God of the heaven and God of the earth. Later, he only calls him God of the heaven and not God of the earth. So Rashi explains to us, because the later verse was describing where he was at an earlier point in time. In an earlier point in time, God was only in the heavens. If you came on earth and you spoke to any person on earth, most people didn't acknowledge God. And you ask the angels, of course they acknowledge God. He was a God of the heavens. But you spoke to a person on earth, they didn't acknowledge God. It was only because of Abraham's activities on earth that people started to pay attention and recognize it actually makes a lot. It's actually true that God acknowledges the earth. So in this sense, that is what this mission is trying to tell us. These are 5 things, and we'll go again, the 5 things that bring to attention to the world that the world is under one authority, and that one authority and that one person who's responsible for the world is God. So what is that? The Torah. By learning the Torah, it's a document that tells us God created the heaven and earth. It's the main way that the world knows that God is the owner of the heaven and earth. We'll skip this one for now. Abraham was the one who brought attention to this fact that Abraham was the first publicizer, even though it was knowledge to other people, but not in a scaled way like Abraham, who really publicized it to the whole world. The people of Israel are a light unto the nations, constantly reminding everyone. And the Holy Temple was the place in Israel where you went there and you saw, here you walk into this place, obviously there's a God in the world, So these are 5 things that brought attention to God in the world. Now let's take a deeper dive. And based on this information that we just shared, you'll notice something interesting. Okay, let's look at the supporting proof for Abraham. Abraham is an acquisition, as it is written. This is something that there was a priest in Abraham's time named Melchizedek, and he blessed him. In other words, he blessed Abraham and said, "Blessed be Abraham to God Most High, acquirer of heaven and earth." Right? So the commentary on this Mishnah say, hold on, this is support that God acquires the heaven and earth. In what way is this support that Abraham is an acquisition? But based on this framework that we just shared here, the fact that a non-Jewish priest is declaring, "Blessed be Abraham to God Most High, acquirer of heaven and earth," is biggest proof that Abraham was someone who brought attention to the masses that there's a God in the world. So Abraham was the one who brought attention to everyone that there's an acquirer of heaven and earth. 2 more points before we wrap up this Mishnah. Number 1 is the concept of heaven and earth. Heaven and earth are one acquisition. What it means to say is, some people, the greater the scientist, the greater believer they become. Why? Normally we hear science versus faith. But actually, when you come to see the amazing way in which the world is created, and nature and all these amazing things that even the best doctors, don't even, so many things that are so beyond our comprehension even today, that they come to appreciate this is obviously the handiwork of a designer, of a master designer who's involved in this. Heaven represents, divine forces, spiritual forces that are beyond nature, that break the laws of nature in order to make things work out in miraculous ways. So nature is a system, is a closed system that just recognizing the system is a beautiful system. But then sometimes God performs a miracle and breaks the system in order to accomplish something. So, and many times we have the ability to recognize them. Things don't go according to plan. But then in hindsight, we recognize what a beautiful blessing that was and how lucky we are. So seemingly these are two separate vehicles to which we become aware of God. But in reality, the Mishnah is trying to hint us that it's really one. It's really one concept. We cannot separate heaven and earth. We cannot say, my spiritual life is my spiritual life and my mundane life is my mundane life. We really have to see it as two pieces of one puzzle. When we're going to work, it's one way of us connecting to God. And when we go to synagogue, it's a different way of connecting to God. But it's not as if I go to synagogue to connect and I go to work to think about myself. No, when we're working, it's another means for us to connect to God and see God's handiwork in action. So this explains the deeper meaning in the following discussion. So I'm going to read it just for the sake of time. The school of Shammai says, first the heavens were created, then the earth. And I have proof, as it is written, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. So heaven was created and then the earth was created. The school of Hillel says, first the earth was created and then the heavens, as it is written, on the day that God Almighty made earth and heavens. So it's actually in Genesis itself. In chapter 1, it implies that God created the heavens and the earth. In chapter 2, it implies God Almighty made earth and heavens. Said Reb Shimon ben Yochai, I wonder why they argue. I say that the heavens and earth were created together, like a pot with its cover. What's happening in this Mishnah, a deeper reading of this, is that they're arguing, what is life all about? Is life to escape? Is a life to transcend the physical plane? And the primary goal of human achievement is transcendence, to become closer to the spiritual. And that is the view of Shammai. Shammai said, the whole point of reality is for the heavens. Heavens is first. Heavens is primary. We're in this reality in order to escape and transcend the confines of the physical materialistic reality and to see things deeper and not the shallow imprisonment of materialism and physicality. That's Shammai's view. Hillel says, no, the whole point of spirituality is to give us the tools to make the world a beautiful place and to make the physical reality shine. So the whole goal is the physical world. That's what's primary. The earth was created first. Is the goal of prayer in order to help you be an honest businessman? Or is the order of being an honest businessman in order to have support so you can have time to pray and study? That's the argument of Shammai and Hillel. Comes along Shimon ben Yochai. He says they're really all together. You can't have one without the other. You need both. It's like a lid and a cover. They work together. So that's why heaven and earth, our Mishnah says, is one acquisition. It's one concept. These two the spiritual reality and the physical reality are all one goal of helping us connect to God. The last thing I want to show you, and this is just an interesting point to make, which shows us the beauty of Torah. When we study Torah, you come to discover that there are many different levels and dimensions to studying Torah. You could read Torah from a legal view, from a historical view, from an ethical view. There's many different dimensions, a Kabbalistic view, of which to learn Torah. And sometimes you could feel that they're each in their own silo. If you're learning Torah like a Kabbalist, you can't learn Torah from the literal meaning, a literist approach. If you're learning Torah like a legal analyst, you're learning it. It's different systems, a different approach. And to a certain extent, it is true. They each have a different framework, and you can't really ask a question, a contradiction between a legal framework and how they analyze a verse to a Kabbalistic framework and how a Kabbalist would analyze a verse. But at the same time, it's one Torah and they're unified. So here is a piece from Reb Shmelka of Nikolsburg. He was also a great Hasidic master. And he shared the following analysis. He says, let's look at a legal text from the Talmud that tells us of a father's obligation towards his children. And it says a father has 5 obligations. Number 1, and I'm reading text 4. Let me move my thing here because how do I move this? Here we go. Okay. So a father is obligated to do the following for his son: to circumcise him, redeem him if he gets kidnapped, to pay the ransom, to teach him Torah, to find a wife for him to marry, and to teach him a trade. So Reb Shmelka of Nikolsburg says this teaching from the Talmud is identical to the Mishnah that we just learned. You'll say, what does it have to do with the Mishnah we just learned? What's the connection? He says, I'll show you the connection. 5 things that God acquired in this world are the same 5 things that a father has to teach to his son. To circumcise him corresponds to Abraham. Abraham was the first Jew and the first one to have the covenant that's marked by circumcision. Redeem him, that's similar to God and the Jewish people. He took us out of Egypt and redeemed us and saved us from slavery. To teach him Torah is obviously, God cherishes the Torah. To find him a wife for him to marry corresponds to the Holy Temple, which is considered the marital chamber of God and his people, where they connect is, we're considered the bride to God. We connect in the Holy Temple. And to teach him a trade corresponds to, the science, the heaven and earth, is the wisdom of the heaven and earth, which is the obligation for a parent to teach a trade. I thought that was an interesting insight to see the link of, the legal aspect of Torah, which is this piece from the Talmud, and the ethical teaching of the Torah, that they're really all one. Okay.
Okay, great.
That's for today.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you for joining us. I just want to let you know, you may be wondering, there's only 2 people participating. There's actually a few more on YouTube.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I figured it out. And you can watch it on YouTube again. Right?
But I really appreciate the people that come on here to actually participate. It's much easier for me to present when I get the feedback and the interaction. So I appreciate it.
Great.
Yes.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay, be well. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
joining.
Okay.